of the Education, Children and Young People's Committee in 2025. We have apologies today from the convener, Douglas Ross, and we welcome Ross McCall, who is attending for the first time as a substitute member. And as such, our first item of business will be to invite Ross to declare any relevant interests.
Thank you, convener. I have no interest to declare at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Our main business today is to hear from Colleges Scotland and college principals. We are interested to explore what progress, if any, has been made against the Committee's Colleges Regionalisation Inquiry Report recommendations. The report was published in March 2023. The session will also hopefully provide useful background to help the Committee prepare for its scrutiny of legislation on post-school education and skills funding. Can I welcome today Andy Whitty, Director of Strategic Policy and Corporate Governance, Colleges Scotland, Joanna Campbell, Chair of the College Principals Group and Principal of Dumfries and Galloway College, Audrey Cumberford, Principal Edinburgh College, and Neil Cowie, Principal of North East Scotland College. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today. As you know, the microphones are operated remotely, so there's no need to press any buttons before or after you speak. Before we move to questions from members, we're going to have a brief opening statement from Andy Whitty on behalf of the panel. Andy, you have up to 3 minutes and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Convener, and good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to meet today. Your committee's inquiry report that was published in 2023 was a milestone moment in reflecting on the years that have passed since regionalisation, and it's now 2 years on from that report. It is safe to say that there has been progress. Since the committee's report, both the Harewood and Withers review have taken place, and there's legislation proposed flowing from that. However, many of the concerns of the committee noted in 2023 are still concerns to us on the panel today. You'll hear concerns around the pace, you'll hear concerns around that there needs to be the ambition that the college sector has needs to be matched by that of Scottish Government and its agencies. But what I think you'll also pick up, I suspect, in answers is a mix of concern, frustration, gratitude for what has been provided, but also hope. And it's often difficult to balance these different emotions when there's so many moving parts that are happening in the college sector. What is clear is Scotland's economy needs skilled workers. To give an idea of the scale, just for the Inverness and Cromarty Green Freeports area, they're expected to generate 11,000 jobs in that. And in the First Minister's recent speech on the economy, he did talk about needing to build in Scotland, needing to skill up the workforce for that stable employment here and to maximise the opportunity for Scotland and its economy. But skills are also needed to deal with poverty, and income from social security has provided a safety net for those in that position. But another part of the Scottish Government strategy is about increasing income from employment, and it recognises the need for skills and qualifications and for the provision of that to happen. Yet what we're seeing at the moment come to fruition is what we warned about in evidence to this committee that we provided in May 2024. The impact if funding is further reduced and is inadequate. And unfortunately, we're seeing that now. Audit Scotland has evidenced a 17% reduction in real-term cuts. And that level of disinvestment is devastating. That's almost £1 in every 5 has gone. Last week, it was notable that there was an announcement of £3.5 million additional funding for the sector for offshore wind and health and social care partnership. And that's great that the critical role of colleges has been recognised, and we will work with Scottish Government and others on maximising that. The data shows that for the offshore wind industry, there's a gap of about 35,000 skilled workers predicted by industry. And of course, this is against a backdrop that the Barnett consequentials of the recent increase in funding for FE south of the border is around £29 million into the Scottish block grant. And so you can see that example of those mixed elements and mixed feelings as these moving parts happen. And there's that expectation that colleges respond to this once-in-a-generation opportunity, for example, around offshore wind, but having to do that with shrinking resources. But let me finish on hope. I mentioned hope earlier. The college sector is ambitious. The sector leaders agreed a document before Christmas setting out the sector's strategic priorities, and that's a foundational document to set out the stage for a vision for the sector by the sector, which we're looking to publish in spring this year. Colleges exist in a social contract with people in Scotland to provide that place of hope and a path out of poverty. It's a social contract with employers that we will provide the skilled workers and graduates that they need to keep their doors open. And there's much more colleges could do to boost Scotland's economic productivity and lift people out of poverty. College leaders are keenly, enthusiastically working with industry to understand their needs and provide a very wide range of initiatives that helps that. What colleges need, however, is that support to maintain and then build on the valuable work taking place across the country day in, day out. And the sustainability of colleges is still not assured. Thank you, Deputy Convener.
Okay, thank you, Andy. We're going to move on to questions from members now, and I'll start things off this morning with our first question. My first question would be, what further support is needed to help the sector set priorities for the years ahead? Audrey, you've just caught my eye, so I'll come to you first.
For me, colleges are very clear, I think, as Andy has just articulated, as what I would refer to, not just the potential that colleges have, but the untapped potential that colleges have to meet those particular needs that we know are fast coming our way in relation to, particularly in terms of people skills and talent and meeting our regional needs. And we're operating within two horizons, if you like, and one that's trying to respond to the immediate skills needs and demands of our regions, but at the same time have a very keen eye on the future and what is coming at us very, very quickly in terms of those skills gaps, new jobs that are required, and importantly, people that are currently in work but are going to have to be upskilled and reskilled very, very quickly over the next few years to be in the right place to respond to those new and changing jobs. So I believe that colleges and the sector as a whole have a very clear sense of where we have to get to. And part of the frustration, I guess, is that it would be my view that Scottish Government is incumbent on Scottish Government not simply to say reform is needed, when I agree reform is needed, but to be very clear about setting and creating the appropriate environment where we can then, as sector leaders, deliver on that reform and get to where we need to be. And again, within that context of priorities and reform, it's not simply about reform, it's about a clear consensus about where that reform has to get us to. So why are we reforming? And then how do we reform? And that's my biggest frustration, is that systems don't reform naturally, is that there has to be an environment and a transition towards getting where the destination that we all want to be. And part of the frustration is knowing what we have to do, and sooner rather than later, but that environment just not feeling like the kind of environment that's going to support the change that's needed. And it's not just about financial sustainability, although that's a clear driver. It has to be about what Scotland needs and where colleges, the vocational system in our country, needs to be able to support that economic productivity as well as social cohesion and addressing other social imperatives like poverty.
Okay, thank you. I should have probably said at the beginning to just catch my eye if you would like to come in. Neil, which is exactly
thank you,
what
Deputy Convener. Following on from what Audrey's saying and acknowledging the issue around the funding is critical for us. And certainly in terms of where we are at, And I would agree with Andy, there's a lot of hope in the sector to do good things even better. But every college is a very broad church. And we have an array of people who demand, rightfully so, high-quality educational training experiences from us. And certainly in terms of where we are at Nescol, we aren't to turn people away. So we've seen, for example, our MA provision double in 3 years. And interestingly enough, where engineering is concerned, that is one of our growth areas, and it's a concern for us to turn people away. We've also got high demand from schools. We have about 6,500 young learners on a school college programme just now. And there's a fundamental question to ask, I think, about, because I think we do get kind of siloed in the idea of a post-16 educational reform, when actually it's a bigger thing than that. And we have been much bigger than that. We've got very wide doors and deep reach. And we are anchor institutions within our community. And we serve a lot of people, and we do try and change their life experiences and chances as a consequence of what it is that we do. But in order to do that, we need to be funded appropriately. And I think there is something interesting if you look at the funding that's allocated to learners across Scotland. To deliver a full-time HN 15-credit course for our college, it would cost about £4,500. That's what we're funded to, £4,500. The equivalent at this level would be £7,500. And school college full-time places are funded to £8,500. My question probably to this group and to my colleagues is that fair? And why is it that college students should be funded to a lower level? I think also, though, that if you're looking at other things, there's certainly, and what I would advocate for, and I know that the SFC are on to this, but we really need funding change at pace, because we're itching to do stuff. And we understand the priorities of Scottish Government. We understand the priorities that we can play into very effectively. It's our bread and butter stuff. But in order to do that effectively, we need to think really differently about how we are funded. And again, just quoting some figures to you that I'd asked my VP of Finance and Resources to give me in preparation for today. If Nesco was funded at the average credit price given to all colleges, we would actually, of medium-sized colleges, we would have an extra £1.4 million of grant. And actually, if we were funded to the level of the sector average, we would be funded to £2.9 million of grant. And that's rather convenient for us, because since we have merged, and we merged one very large urban college with a small rural one, we lost roughly £3 million every year because of the way the college was funded. And that was because the former Banff Buchan College was funded with rurality premium to sustain lower levels of learning in areas that simply couldn't create volume. So we really do need to have something change in that funding model, and it needs to be delivered at pace. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Joanna?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Convener. I think the first thing I would say is that colleges feel empowered to respond to their regional needs, and we have a great track record in being able to do so. But in answer to your question, I think for us, I'm picking up on what colleagues have said already, there is a need for us to look at the sustainable funding going forward. I sit on the tripartite group, which I know the Minister has referenced in this committee previously, and we have been afforded a number of flexibilities through that group, which has been most welcome. But, as Neil has said, the pace that we need to allow us to continue as a sector flourish, if you will, we need to see that pace injected into that. The other thing I would also add is the investment in our infrastructure as well, particularly around capital investment to support Scotland's transition to net zero, and also looking at our digital estate as well. Now, both of these will require capital investment into the sector, and whilst we've had a modest increase in our capital for the following financial year, certainly we have a well-documented backlog in capital maintenance across the entire college estate. The other thing I would also add is that we need to remove duplication in the system. So, for example, Neil's spoken about the school-college partnership. The school-college partnership accounts for approximately 16% of college provision, but actually there's overlap in some of the funding that's associated with that, and similarly at the other end of what we do as colleges, in our HNCs and our HND offering, there's equally overlap with the undergraduate provision in universities as well. And then my final point is we have made at this committee previously points in relation to the crisis in mental health and well-being that exists amongst our students, and also the impact of the cost of living crisis on our students. And as you will be aware, the funding that was allocated to the sector for counselling to support mental health and well-being is no longer available to us. And therefore, what colleges are doing, they're making very difficult decisions to support that. And it's only right and proper that we do support that, but that means that we're divesting in other areas in order to do that.
I think some of the members have got questions
Okay,
regarding
sorry.
that exact topic, so we can delve into it deeper later on. Andy, have you got anything further to say?
Not a huge amount to add to what my colleagues have said. I think there's elements around fair funding and that comparability across the sector. The point's been made. You know, if you had twins and one went to university and one went to college to study the same course, they would get funded at hugely different levels. And I think there's about how the monies that are already in the system can be used more efficiently. But obviously there is the huge impact of the reduction in funding and that steady and large reduction in funding that we've seen over the years.
Okay, thank you. Pam, have you got a supplementary you'd like to come in with?
That's okay, convener. Thank you. Good morning. And thank you for your opening statement, which I found incredibly helpful and also really powerful. I'm sure people listening will understand that the sector is in a very difficult circumstance, but we can hear the hope that you have for it, and it's in that context that I want to ask my questions. I've heard in your answer to the convener's first question about pace. Can you give us a sense of why the pace is not what you would like it to be?
Yeah, I mean, I kick off. If that's, yeah, I think our frustration around pace is because of the situation that colleges are in, and so you've got this paradox of the hope and the ambition that the sector has, and our understanding of how vital it is for the Scottish Government priorities, for example, around reducing poverty and the economy and the NHS. And having to balance that with hugely difficult decisions that individual principals are having to make around the impact of those cuts, be it reducing curriculum offer, maybe reducing geographical location offers, and so the need to see the progress made is really, really important. And so out of the tripartite group that Joanna mentioned, 2 weeks ago we got confirmation around asset disposal, for example, and a new approach that will allow colleges to know more clearly what they can keep from asset disposal if there's a college in that position. But that was agreed in principle last May. And we've just had the confirmation in writing to understand how that's going to be. And so we sort of know things are happening. And I suppose this is this mix of different emotions around it. We know things are happening. We know things are trying to be done, but they just need to be done faster in order to help the college sector where it's at the moment.
And you've all kind of said in advance today that flexibility is really important so that you can do the things that you want to do. Do either of the principals maybe have any examples of things that are happening regionally where there's good examples of collaboration, but maybe something's in the way of delivering that?
Can I respond to that? Yeah, I think so. You know, we're also in a situation where we work very closely with our local authority partners, and obviously they're facing some quite significant decisions to make in terms of their budgets. And we were in conversations with partners discussing about what it is that we could do around the senior phase. And I do think there is a more radical, bigger conversation needed that nobody seems to be grabbing hold of. I've got colleagues and former colleagues who are working in schools, who are working with some pretty disengaged young people. And we want to get them on the path so that their life chances can improve and that they do not become inactive citizens, another drain on the economy. And I think there is something about, well, if the system thus far, and I think there have been people who have given evidence to this committee earlier on from the school sector who very eloquently indicated that, you know what, the qualifications model and the way we assess young people doesn't apply equally to everybody and doesn't really work for everybody. For us, I think that, we know that we are quite transformational in terms of what it is that we offer young people coming into college. And it's a different setup. People with industry experience who come to teaching as a secondary profession. There are people who are very much, of a... and actually, for young learners, I don't hear a bell going off every 50 minutes telling them where to go and they can call me Neil, not Mr. Cowie. It's a different regime. And if the regime that they're in currently just now ain't working for them, is there more that we can actually do for them by moving them to the colleges quicker? And in order to do that, I think there needs to be more funding. And a couple of other small points before I concede to Audrey. I think one of the other things that we have very wide doors and deep reach. That's what we do as colleges. And I think for us, that the quality of teaching, I think, is second to none. I'm privileged to work with a strong team of very good lecturers. But I'm also very privileged to work with some very conscientious, hard-working support staff, and that wraparound support that we give our learners evolves every year into something more complex, but we do it and we deliver it. As my colleagues have alluded, that is becoming harder to do now with less money. And we're talking about, we need to press on, because I think there are emergencies, on the horizon around mental well-being, about poverty generally, about disengaged young learners, and actually the demands of employers. I haven't even mentioned that. But, if we're truly committed to turning this economy around and making it greater than what it already is, then we need to be able to meet employer needs now and not hang around. And we've got demand. Thank you. Audrey.
The system as it currently stands, I would not describe it as being agile and responsive and flexible. But there have been 2 or 3, I believe, strong examples which have signalled and shown what can be achieved when there is system and agility built in. So, for example, one example would be, it's been spoken about many times at this committee, is the Flexible Workforce Development Fund, which was specifically established to strengthen those links between colleges and industry to help upskill and reskill people in work, to support those businesses to innovate and be better businesses, and at the same time for those businesses to influence and shape what's happening back at the ranch in the college. Now in Edinburgh, we have worked with the Flexible Workforce Development Fund. We upskilled and reskilled the equivalent of 1 out of every 50 people that are employed in Edinburgh and the wider region. And we did it because the system of the Flexible Workforce Development Fund was agile and flexible and responsive. Therefore, we were able to do it. Another really strong example was this is where pots of money can be helpful, but very unhelpful because they're not mainstreamed, is what was called the Skills Boost Fund. And again, that sat outside of our current system and was extremely flexible and agile. And again, to translate what that means on the ground, in Edinburgh alone, we've got something like 700 vacancies currently in Edinburgh for health and social care. They don't have time to wait for somebody to go through an HNC, an HND, or a degree for 4 years. They need people with basic skills that they are very clearly can articulate. And if those skills are met, they were going to guarantee jobs for those individuals. So that fund allowed the NHS in Edinburgh and the Lothians to co-design a programme which was only 6 or 7 weeks long, because we co-determined we needed that amount of time to work with somebody to get them to the very basic skills that health board, when the person finished the course on the Friday, they were walking into a job with the health board on the Monday. They were already on payroll and they were in a job. That's flexible, that's responsive. And there were hundreds of people, cohorts of people going through that. Skills Boost funding it was a pot of money, it appeared great, we demonstrated that it was wonderful, but then it stopped. The third example I would give would be, and this is specific to the Edinburgh and South East, is our City Regional Deal, where our City Regional Deal has a skills programme built within it, £25 million to focus with the 4 colleges and the 4 universities on data, digital innovation and analytics, women, and also construction. Now, again, that skills funding has more than delivered the outcomes that we set out to achieve in terms of upskilling, training, getting people who are unemployed, women in particular, into digital areas of the sector and digital jobs. And again, so there's 3 very good examples of, I think, where we can show quite clearly where, if we can design a system that has inbuilt flexibilities, but also trust and allows the providers, whether it's the colleges, the universities and other providers working together in our region, then we can deliver in a very responsive and flexible manner. And I would argue actually can also respond much better to what's needed in terms of further down the road. So for Edinburgh, we know what we need in terms of skills planning in Edinburgh with the various sectors and investments that are coming into the city and beyond in the Lothians. So we already know that. The challenge is saying, well, how can we collectively start to work to provide the solutions to delivering that?
Thank you.
Ross, you've got a question?
One of the messages that came really clear from the sector in the lead up to the inquiry that we did was a desire to have some clear strategic direction from government, an understanding of what government expected of you. And in response, the government committed to develop the purpose and principles document, obviously not just for the college sector, but for the wider landscape. Now that that document has been published and out for some time, I think 18 months-ish at this point, do you feel that that document was the answer to the question that you were asking, that question around strategic direction? Has it been clear enough in setting a direction for the sector? Andy, you were looking to come in?
I can start that off. I'm sure some of my colleagues will want to come in as well. You're right. Purpose and Principles was published, I think, June 23. I think there's very little in that that's difficult to disagree with as far as the principles in it. It is quite high level. And I think also, the Minister's accepted that there's a raft of asks of the college sector and it could probably be clearer. And that's why, the sector published the document before Christmas. That's why the sector leaders now have taken the view that the sector needs to lead the sector and just setting out that strategic direction and that vision so that it can play its part in that economic development and to respond to the economic needs and the opportunities and the inward investment that is there, and to look to produce that system that truly is agile, that Audrey's referred to, which is what's required and needed. But also, as I mentioned in the opening statement, to deal with poverty and as people gain jobs and stable jobs and long-term jobs, that is, as recognised in the Scottish Government's own strategy, fundamental to help move people out of poverty. But it's positioning colleges so they can play that key role in the regional economics, and that does differ what's needed across the different regions, and that's where that flexibility is needed. The provision of the funding in a way that allows the regional college to be able to deliver what's needed, to look at a more outcomes-focused ask of what is of the sector rather than just necessarily measuring activity.
So it sounds like, just before bringing others in, it sounds like what you're saying is the Purpose and Principles document was so agreeable that it didn't really provide direction. Is that a fair summary there, that the sector then therefore has needed to do that itself, to just make a series of decisions about strategic direction, because that document did not provide that clear direction of travel.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was maybe even this committee, the Minister said that he accepted there was a raft of asks and that further clarity would be beneficial. So, so we're looking to want to take that forward ourselves as sector leaders.
Thanks very much. I'd be interested from yourselves, has anyone sat down, when you're doing corporate planning for your own institutions, have you sat down, started with the purpose and principles document and thought, right, we'll work back from here? Does it provide that kind of value to you? And if not, what value has it provided? Neil?
I would reflect what Andy said. It played back. I think we've been listened to. But the key is in actions rather than words. And when you look at some of the statements within it, you need to have something that follows through on that. And that's the problem I had with it. I also think that in the conversations we had around the consultation related to purpose and principles, again, I come back to this point about pre-16 education, and I made the point at the time that if you're actually looking at post-16 educational reform, you need to look at what comes before as well. I don't think that really got an airing as a consequence of all this. Where I do think, though, there's something, and again, where I was looking for more of I think that in the absence of direction, our college, probably with my leadership, definitely with my leadership, we just cracked on and did stuff for our region. And that's what I think we're all, responsive, adaptive leaders here. That's what where our obligations lie. And I think there is something that we need to kind of coalesce around common themes, particularly around government priorities, and make sure that what it is that we're doing is delivering to that regional agenda, but in being very mindful of what the government priorities are. Interestingly enough, Audrey and I are involved in the College Alliance. And again, something that's kind of come from a very recent set of conversations that we had in Belfast with colleagues was around Jobs and Skills Australia. And I was quite intrigued by what that was. And I think this is something in there that we need to kind of flesh out a little bit more. And for me, where I really was looking to fill a void is actually get a clearer idea about the data insights that we need to inform what it is that we do. And Australia seems to have cracked this. And if they have a 10-year plan, which is rolled over and reviewed every year, that is telling those tertiary educators exactly where the job gaps are and what's going to be needed year on year for that 10 years, something as concrete as that would be very helpful to us in the jobs that we do.
Thanks. If anyone else has anything to add, don't feel you have to if you feel the points have already been covered. I'd love to go further into that point around data with Neil, but I know colleagues are going to come back to that later on. Grant, in that case, that's me, Convener. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. Miles?
Thank you, Deputy Convener. Good morning to the panel. Thank you for joining us today. And I maybe want to carry on some of that conversation you've started there, Neil, in relation to post-16 learning, but that pre-16 opportunity as well. And just wondered how panel members think schools and colleges can further develop their relationships in order to improve effectiveness and these partnerships. And I recently visited Bernardo's Works here in the capital, who I know has been working with Edinburgh College, especially around 14 and 15-year-old pupils who aren't going to school and, like you mentioned, are disengaged from the school system. And so just wondered, in terms of pre-16 but also post-16, how you think those relationships can be improved. Audrey, I'll maybe bring you in, as I mentioned, Edinburgh College.
So like Neil, actually, we have the equivalent of something like 4 very large high schools studying in the college every week. So there is demand. Yep. There's no question in terms of pupils at all ages and at all levels within schools experiencing that vocational, technical, kind of professional offer to help guide them in terms of their futures and give them a sense of what's possible and where their talents are and possible pathways, absolutely. On the ground, what does help significantly in relation to school-college partnerships is actually at the local authority level. So my patch, if you like, footprint crosses 3 local authorities. And when I first came to Edinburgh, it was clear that we were dealing with 3 quite distinct local authorities, and actually there was that collective power of the 3 local authorities actually working together much more closely and looking at the benefits and the added value that a school-college partnership can bring. And that does exist within this region and is very, very strong. And as school-college partnership is part of our distinctiveness and what we do very, very well and should be supported going forward. There's no question of that.
Yeah. Neil.
Could I maybe add to that? I think that, again, thinking about the numbers that we work with, we're working with about 28 secondary schools, about 15 primary schools and 4 private schools. And as I said earlier on, there's about 6,500 young people who are on a school-college programme with us any given year. But what's quite interesting for us in that region is, and it is a very large geographic footprint that we deal with there, but we are operating with something in the region of about 35 of all Aberdeen City and Aberdeenshire school leavers will come to us. Mm-hmm. And actually that number increases up to 60% if they happen to be in an area which is SIMD 10 or 20. Mm-hmm. So we have an obligation to make sure that what we're offering them continues to ensure that we've got effective progression pathways. Going back to the primary school situation just briefly, I think it is about thinking more long-term about the Scottish economy and actually what that then needs, and trying to get, particularly in P6 and 7, some ideas in the heads of young people, but more so their influences at home and in school, about what the careers are likely to be and what we're going to need in terms of skills gap plugging in later life. We also deliver 250 FAs, and that is a really interesting thing for us because that's growing. And I think we do that pretty well across City and Shire. But interesting enough, it does give people that idea about what work is all about. Yeah. And then when we are that kind of modern apprenticeship provider that's the biggest in the North East, that's critical for us to get that feeling in there. But also in terms of, there's a big focus, I think, on the technical levels that we're going to need. And actually, those careers, particularly around things like energy transition, which is obviously very much focused in the North East right now, we need to make sure that young people and their influences beyond and within school are aware of what careers are coming up. And that's where just getting out and about to do all that kind of stuff takes time and resource, but we want to do it because it's really important that we do so.
Yes. Joanna, did you want to?
So the school-college partnership is a real strength of the college sector, and you'll hear, I mean, Audrey and Neil have given you a couple of examples there. There are many in every college, and certainly within my college, we have co-created a number of different programmes with our local authority colleagues, and as a result of that, we have seen our numbers increase by about 30%, and our attainment levels as well increase in our school-college partnership, which is really positive. The downside of all of this is, whilst we create this excitement around the school-college partnership and the choices that young people have in the next stages of their education journey, when we're in the situation that we're in, where funding is challenging going forward, we don't have capacity to do more of that. So, for example, in my college, our applications are up 40%. We're a rural college. There isn't another college close by that those young people can go to. So for me, it's as I said at the beginning there, it's a strength, but the difficulty that we face going forward is that we are really curtailed in being able to do more of that because of the current situation that we find ourselves in.
Thank you for that. And thinking, you know, what struck me when I met some of these young people were they were in this school-college partnership, but they still hated going to school and were ready for college. And just wondered what your view was and expertise on these young people. In fact, some told me that they'd go to school just because they were being forced to, and were still completely disconnected from that school setting. And it was that kind of, until you're 16, we can't do anything really with you apart from you can go to college and do some of the things you want to do now. So just wondered kind of, in terms of reforms, what you think that should look like.
For me, I think that, you know, I'm grateful to be having conversations with head teachers and with you know, senior executives within local authorities. And I know that there are some interesting challenges around the budgetary constraints they find themselves under, and actually their ability to discharge their statutory responsibilities is key. And I think for us that we understand that those people actually probably need more of our input, more of our resource, are those that are at the sharper end of our communities. And so consequently, I know that the college isn't for everybody, But actually, I think that, going back to a point I made earlier, if the system that they have been educated in thus far is not engaging them, is it not worth a punt to try something different? Mm-hmm. For me, I think it's fundamentally, we've got plenty of evidence to say years on years, and I've been in the privilege of being in this college 25 years and in public service a lot longer. But as an educator, 25 years, and I have seen the transformational effect that colleges have on these kind of learners. I can even think of one right now who got a PhD eventually out of that, and he was an absolute handful once upon a time. But people aren't going to realise that potential if we don't try something different. And bearing in mind that I think that colleges, in terms of the kit, it's very industry standard, it's higher than our colleagues in schools can probably afford or have. And going back to that point about those people that are teaching and supporting, they have industry experience, they have a degree of credibility, they've come into the teaching profession as a secondary career option. And the value added that they give these young people is incredible, and it's also credible. And I think that does help us get young people into a mindset about what it is that they could do for work.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Come back on Neil's point as well. The other thing is, if you look at our curriculum offer, the colleges offer accredited qualifications, but we can also do college certificated qualifications as well. And, you know, building on Neil's point about the lecturers and the teaching staff who are involved in teaching on those qualifications, there's a degree of vocational expertise in being able to offer that curriculum that they perhaps don't have available within the school system. So I think it creates a level of excitement, and also it gives those young people the opportunity to develop skills that they perhaps wouldn't have been able to develop in other sectors, if you will.
Yeah, Andy.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, to give some idea of scale, the last figures I saw was there's about 70,000 pupils in and out of colleges across Scotland every week. So it's a significant input they do, and as my colleagues have said, that allows the potential of them, it allows them to contribute, it helps certain individuals risk of stopping or disengaging from education, and so that is really critical and helpful. Foundation apprenticeships have been mentioned. I think some of the challenges are around not only dealing at local authority level, but the conversations that have to happen with individual schools, individual head teachers in order to set some of these up, but also need to ensure that the funding levers don't work against what's in the best interests of an individual learner. And so is the funding, because of the tightness of funding in schools, driving certain behaviours around that. We also, I think, need to ensure we avoid duplication of input and structures being established, and the schools trying to then replicate what colleges are doing. But just to give an example, a very practical challenge. So in I live in a small local authority area. There's 3 high schools. To save on transport costs, the 3 schools have different finishing times, different days of the week, so they can maximise the use of transport to save money, which makes sense. But that hugely limits the timetabling opportunities for those school pupils to then attend even a local college, and so that and that's been driven by tight finances there as well.
Thank you for that. And my final question is in relation to college student associations. And looking back at the committee's inquiry, it called for minimum standards for funding and the independence of college student associations. So I just wondered from the panel what progress has been made around that call to date, if any progress.
In Edinburgh College, EXA, which is Edinburgh College Student Association, is a force to be reckoned with, and a very healthy and positive one as far as the college is concerned. And they're embedded in everything that we do, from sitting on the board of management all the way through to being part of college committees and informing how we shape and deliver what we do. So they're a fundamental part. They are independent. They do have their own budget, and a substantial budget, and they approach that with us on an annual basis, as I would expect. And we have quite robust conversations about budget and what their priorities are and where they need to focus. Our success, I think, has come from actually having full-time student association officials in the college. So to expect students to do that role while they're studying is really very, very hard. And so to have them paid as they're doing, in effect, a full-time job, we found to be really, really effective, and is a great development for their own skills and talents in terms of what they go on to do next.
Is that the same model you
Yeah.
referred back as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks, Camina.
Thank you, Miles. Next question is from Ros, and then I'll go on to Pam.
Thank you, Deputy Convener. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much indeed. So, great links with education, with schools, fantastic. Links with small businesses, with medium enterprises. As an example, I know there's challenges and there's positives with that. I'm interested in how that's going. Recently, I was at Fife College that couldn't get a single placement for their social care course for a whole year. Just couldn't offer that side of the course. So, given that you're building these links with small and medium enterprises, what's it been like since the Future Workforce Development Fund has come to an end? Can you give us an idea on how that is going? Who wants to go first? Thank you very much, Neil.
Thank you, Ros. I think the Flexible Workforce Development Fund was an interesting journey for us. And I think that having been involved originally in some of the working groups that brought that to get to fruition, but it was never really something settled. That's how we felt. There was a bit of a surprise launch. COVID impacted on it. There were delayed starts within the year, and it fluctuated in terms of levels of funding. But it was interesting that it did give us reach to SMEs in a way that perhaps we hadn't had before. And I think from at its height, we were allocated something in the region of about £1.9 million of Flexible Workforce Development Fund. I think the last allocation that we got was around about 1.1. But it did give us access to probably a lot more smaller employers, and they were very grateful to receive that, because what we were finding was that, and I think we were speaking that last year, we were supporting about an additional 113 SMEs. But interestingly enough, that had been a challenge once the fund stopped, because SMEs would not seek to necessarily fund that. They valued the fund. They weren't prepared necessarily to go elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And what that's meant for our business community development team, who've overseen the fund in the past, is that they've needed to be more active in supporting SMEs to access funds through alternative funding streams. And again, thinking about the resource there, because as a drop in the ocean to the amount of employers that we've got in the North East, to knock on doors and say, what is it that you might need in order to train your workforce, needs a lot more resource than we can actually afford. So for us, it was a loss to lose the fund, and it's also been an interesting challenge to kind of chase up that kind of opportunity for SMEs within the North East, and to make sure that the offer that, of professional development comes with some sort of fee waiver, where they don't have to kind of worry about the risk that will come to their organisation if they have to fund it themselves.
It's very interesting. Thank you. Audrey, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, in Edinburgh, we supported hundreds, in fact, it was into the thousands of businesses through the Flexible Workforce Development Fund, and I think it's fair to say that the vast majority of SMEs struggle around capacity. Yep. They want to innovate. They want to bring in new people. They want to train their current staff and continue to upskill, but giving them the capacity to help them along that journey is often a challenge for SMEs, and that's where the Flexible Workforce Development Fund helped with that capacity for us as a college to go into those businesses and work with them, as you've described, to establish where is it you're going, what is it you need, what are your priorities, and how can we help. More often than not, about 80% of what we provided through that fund was bespoke. So it was not off-the-shelf qualifications. These companies wanted specifically designed interventions, whether it was skills or support with applied innovation or supporting their business processes or product design. They wanted quick interventions that were bespoke to their needs. So I think that's quite interesting. Yep. And when we did a very recent survey of all of the businesses that we support in Edinburgh, and the results of that survey actually have been hugely informative in terms of where we are going forward next. But 40% of the companies that we have been supporting over a number of years are basically saying that they will no longer be in a position to upskill and reskill their staff, or to look at how they can innovate as a business in terms of trying to make sure they are fit for purpose going forward. And that's a scary number, actually. I think that really is very, very concerning. And yeah, so I mean, we've certainly in the Edinburgh region got very strong evidence straight from the SMEs in our region that says here's what they need, here's what they want. And maybe one last point to finish on, and I can understand that I think we all want to try and get business and industry to invest more within our colleges, and they do already do that in many ways. But just to give an example, the businesses that we worked with through the Flexible Workforce Development Fund, for many of those businesses, that opened the door to the start of a relationship, and a really strong relationship. And what happened when the fund stopped was that for a number of those businesses, they did continue with that relationship, and they are now paying themselves for the specific training and business support that they need. So for us as a college, that actually leveraged about 30% additional income over and above the £1.6 million that we receive for Flexible Workforce Development Fund as what I would call commercial income, where those businesses did take a decision to actually pay themselves for the support that we could give them. And I do think there is an opportunity to see how we can leverage those relationships with industry to try and get industry themselves to invest more in the training of their staff and to invest more in what colleges can provide for them.
It's very interesting. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Andy.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
So,
first hands up.
So just to follow on with what Audrey has said there, essentially in Dumfries and Galloway region, 97% of our business base is predominantly SMEs. So as you can imagine, the removal of the Flexible Workforce Development Fund was a huge loss. However, we've been successful in tapping into other pots of money. So the Shared Prosperity Funding is an example where we've been able to help businesses in their journey to become carbon neutral. So, for example, we run a number of courses in carbon accountancy and carbon literacy, which have been very, very successful. And also through the support of the Funding Council, we were one of the pilots for the Pathfinder. So we ran an initiative with a number of partners in the region looking at digital skills and helping those businesses upskill and retrain in areas such as cyber resilience, for example. But the other point I was going to make in the more sort of wider sense across the college sector has been very successful in tapping into other funding pots. So I said the Shared Prosperity Fund there. If you look at the work that's happening in the Greater Glasgow region around innovation and helping businesses to innovate and increase their productivity, the 6 colleges in the Greater Glasgow area have been very successful in securing money from UKRI to help run a series of innovation programmes, particularly targeted at SMEs. So, in essence, what I'm saying to you there is, it's been a huge loss to us, Flexible Workforce Development Fund. We've built those relationships with SMEs through that, but equally we're also tapping into other streams of money to help continue on with that good work.
Very interesting, thank you. Lastly, Andy.
Thanks. I mean, you've heard of the benefit around leveraging additional funds that the Flexible Workforce Development Fund produced, and that's gone. I think what that showed was the benefit that colleges can utilise to the economy when they have that flexibility around the funding. And so some of the elements around, even within the current funding amount, where that could be provided as a single pot to colleges, for example, so that they could utilise and use it for what is going to be best in their region, looking at the skill needs and what's needed there is really important. And I think that then links in also to the role of colleges in regional economic partnerships and the regional economies, and needing to make sure as those structures up and running, as skills planning comes back into Scottish Government and national and then the regional skills planning, colleges have to fundamentally be there as an integral part of it to ensure that the planning of skills and the capacity that's needed supports the inward investment and the gaps in where industry need, gaps in the workforce that industry are needing is going to be really important. And that's mixed across the country at the moment, where I think on paper the colleges are there and it's working well in some areas but not in all, and I think that's an area that needs to be looked at. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Convener.
Willie, you'll want to come in for a quick sup?
Just a quick question. I'm a big fan of colleges, but one of the criticisms we get from employers is sometimes they just find the relationship really difficult, that you're not flexible enough, you don't meet their needs. And what is it about the mainstream element of the funding that forces you to go down workforce development funds and shared prosperity routes in order to supply that flexibility that meets directly the needs of employers? What is it about the mainstream funding that's just not flexible? It doesn't help them.
I'm happy to kick that off if you want. Well, our core funding, our mainstream funding, is predominantly designed around qualifications. And as I've just said to you, Flexible Workforce Development Fund proved that qualifications for many, many businesses was not what they needed actually. It was other interventions. So it's designed around qualifications. It's predominantly designed around full-time qualifications. And again, we are clearly seeing year on year the demand for long, fat, full-time qualifications is reducing. It's reducing in terms of what students' demand is, and it's also not what employers want. So our whole funding system, crudely, is based on full-time qualifications and activity, hours of teaching, and bums on seats. And that does not lend itself well to a responsive, agile, bespoke type provision that is often needed.
So when you put that to the Funding Council, which I presume you do,
yes,
what do they say?
Andy?
So we've got a commitment now through the tripartite group to have a review of the funding model. Now that may sound like Groundhog Day for those people that have been in the college sector or looking at the college sector for a little while, and it would be. But what we're needing is that fundamental review to make sure that it delivers and sets up that the conditions so that colleges can actually flourish rather than wither. And part of setting up those conditions is around what that funding model will look like, as far as, as Audrey said, allowing colleges to be able to deliver for what industry needs.
So do you think they're going through the motions, or do they really mean it? Do they want to actually change it so that it's flexible?
From my view, I think they do want to change it. My colleagues might have a different view. I certainly think that in the conversations that we've had with the Funding Council, they understand the iniquity that exists across the piece, particularly in terms of other providers. I've mentioned about how school pupils are funded and how university undergraduates are funded at the same level as a college. But also I think they understand that, the college sector, generally speaking, has been pretty adaptive over many, many years to employer need and to a variety of different needs. And I think we're pretty good at that. And whilst I wouldn't dare take this opportunity to say that, I'll contradict you, my experience, Willie, has been quite different to yours, because I don't, people ordinarily, if they were critical of the college, they would write me a complaint letter. I don't tend to get complaint letters from employers.
I get them.
And if they're about Nesco, then by all means you can direct them to me, but I don't. And I think that's partly because we've got some really good relationships already in the North East around regional economics and regional economy, long established. And actually, I think that one of the other things that we've got is a very adaptive and responsive team of people within the college who understand this isn't rocket science. If you want really good outcomes for other people, you build and sustain good relationships, and that's what we've sought to try and do.
But that's despite the rigidity of the funding system. It could be better.
I agree,
yes.
and we've tried to make that work as best as we possibly can. I think that, you know, going back to things like where I think James Withers' reports has been really effective in picking up the voice of the college sector, is that there might need to be some sort of coalescing around strategic obligations or imperatives at a national level, but leave the colleges at a regional level with the autonomy that allows them, with their partners, to deliver what the regions need.
Okay. Thank you.
Keith, you wanted us to come in?
Funding Council point that Willie's just raised. First of all, just to say that I think nearly every comment you've made relates to funding, and in fact the committee's previous report, all its comments related to funding as well. I think, you know, most of us, I think, in this committee are on different committees, and we get a pretty constant parade of organisations saying they want more funding and are convinced that they are the ones that are treated the worst. And very few actually acknowledge, for the Scottish Government's part, the constraints they're under. We've had 14 years of constrained public sector budgets, but that's just a thing of mine. Coming back to what the Scottish Government's responsible for and the Funding Council, just to be absolutely frank, is it your view, you mentioned earlier on the disparity as to what's spent on a college student, about £4,000 and about £7,000 for an undergraduate student. And I can say from my own experience, the year I had at college, one of the Edinburgh colleges, was the best year in terms of educational attainment I had, more so than university. Is it your view that the Funding Council has an institutional bias in favour of higher education as opposed to further education?
My view, I'm not sure it does, but I sense that this is something that has been a long time to be addressed. It's been perpetuated year on year. And I think now that we're beginning to understand better, and I think actually the senior team at the Funding Council, for me, the best team I have worked with in all the time I've been in the college sector, they are listening. But we do need that to be done more at pace. And I don't necessarily think that, you know, are we... Yeah, you might be right, Keith, in terms of are we consider be treated the worst. I just want us and our students to be treated fairly. And I just don't see that being fair. That, you know, we could do so much. I would hope that you get a sense from the energy of this panel here. We are very ambitious for the college sector. There are things that we are just itching to do. And we're representing... We're in the privileged position of representing thousands of a workforce here. But the reality is that we want to crack on and do these things because we've got people behind us who want to do them too. But we need to be funded at an appropriate level, and we need to be funded fairly for all the things that we're doing. And I'm not sure if it is some sort of organisational bias towards the universities. Maybe the universities has been better at shouting about it than we have. But we're in that place now where there's been a lot of... And I think about the North East, for example, and its ambitions around energy transition. There's a lot of talk about the high-value jobs that perhaps the oil and gas sector once had and generated. And high-value jobs are going to be needed. So there'll still be a requirement for university graduates. But the reality is there's a lot of people beginning to talk about what that technician level looks like. And actually, that is at a lower level. And that really plays into our bread and butter learners and what we do. And if we're to deliver that successful regional economy for all our respective institutions, then we are going to have to be funded in a different and more fairer way.
I'll just press and see if anyone else wants to go any further in terms of the Funding Council, and is there an institutional bias in favour of higher education at the expense of... Because any money that you get, any additional money you'll get, will have to come from somewhere. And, sorry, Joanna then.
A bias. I think, you know, to Neil's point about the Funding Council, they are listening to us, they are working with us. I think the difficulty is that to decouple this system, as in our funding system, it's very, very complex. So there's a complexity that sits behind the machinery of our funding that it's hard to simplify that and look at that future funding model without it having the unintended consequences of other parts of the system. But your point about bias, I don't see that. I'm sorry, Andy.
No, it's okay. Also, to be clear, I don't see a bias in that. I don't see that. And indeed, I mentioned working towards this new vision for the college sector, strategic intent for the college sector, Funding Council have offered their support in doing that. Ultimately, the split in funding between college and university comes from the Scottish Government. But the point around there's no more additional money, even within the current funding pot and amounts, there are elements that could be addressed that would be helpful. So around apprenticeship funding, where in some cases only 40% of every public pound that leaves Scottish Government comes to the colleges to actually deliver the training. And we know that's been looked at the moment by Scottish Government, but this is another one of those pace issues that it would be good to just get to a point where we see much more streamlining of that funding. We've talked about the funding model. That doesn't bring any additional monies in, but it frees up and presents it in a way to colleges where they can utilise that better. We could look at areas of, looking at currently just trying to assess the cost of all public training that is funded across the public sector, and should first point of refusal be colleges to deliver that public, the training that's been paid for by other public bodies, rather than going out to private training providers in the first instance. So that there's various areas where even the existing pot could be utilised in different ways, which would be beneficial to the college sector.
I think it's important not to conflate the funding model for colleges, as we've spoken about, is crying out for building in some agility and flexibility at a regional level to allow us to deliver what we know needs to be delivered. But there is that wider question around the wider funding system itself, actually. And I think, Joanna, as you've said, when as a principal and the chief executive, I'm always going to ask for more money, but accepting that there is no more money, is that wider funding system, is it fair? Is it equitable? Is the money that is there getting the best possible value and in the right place? And a couple of people have mentioned going to Edinburgh College, which is fantastic, as my college. But it is factually correct to say that if you are a person who has put your trust in my college to come and learn and study at my college, you have the lowest public investment out of every college and every university in Scotland going in to support what's happening there. That is neither fair nor is it equitable. And so for me, there is quite a wider question around the funding, as in the funding system. Is it progressive? Is it equitable? Is it fair? And is it in the right place and getting the maximum value for the money that is there? And I would question that, actually.
Thanks, Camilla.
Thank you. I am aware that we still have a fair few members to ask questions, and we've already taken up a fair amount of time that we've got today. So maybe ask members just to keep that in mind when they're asking their questions. And with that, can I go over to Pam? That wasn't a personal thing, Pam.
Thank you, Convener. I will bear it in mind, however. We've been talking a little bit about the national approach, and I think Andy and others have mentioned that obviously there's change afoot and the Minister's looking at that. So can I ask, what involvement has the college sector had in shaping the government's national approach to skills planning?
To take that one, the college sector has been heavily involved in working with the officials and the Minister himself on what skills planning looks like going forward. Obviously, we're waiting the first phase of that announcement happening in the spring. Two of my colleagues have been working very closely with Colleges Scotland to look at how we would operationalise that within the sector, and also mindful of the various actors that will be involved in that, and also being part of that review that's happened with regional economic partners as well. I'll maybe pass over to Andy.
Yeah, no, I would agree with what Joanna's saying, that we have been involved in that. And we, the College Alliance was mentioned, which is across the UK, where opportunity to meet and Audrey, I mean, I may want to add something around some of the visits that we've taken place in different parts of the UK. We've been to Northern Ireland, been to Wales, Midlands, Manchester area, West Midlands area, looking at different approaches there. And as ever, you can't just lift something wholesale that works in one area and drop it into another, but you can look at benefits and what works and is there commonality around that. So we've been able to bring some of those into the discussions when it comes to skills planning and preparation and elements like that. As Joanna says, we're waiting, I think it's around March time, we've been told the first sight of options will be seen around what that national skills planning is going to look like. But did you want to add anything, Audrey, just about the different regional?
I think there's a consistency in response across the 4 nations and even beyond the UK, actually, is finding that sweet spot between being clear about what national priorities are and how we deliver those, but at the same time looking at more regional autonomy to respond to regional demand and regional need. And that, certainly in my experience and the work that I've been doing recently, there is a very common theme around that. And this is where Scotland has actually been ahead of the game, and it's just maybe not quite grasped the potential that was, which was regionalising colleges. And, you know, back in 2012, in fact, I think at the very first evidence call for this subject at this committee, I made that point that, you know, in creating those 13 college regions, there was a real opportunity to how to look at those being the catalyst for regional collaborations, regional partnerships, regional planning and delivery that would take us to that enhanced next step.
Could I maybe add another point to that? I think the engagement of the Minister in relation to our college has been appreciated, and I think also the senior officials that have supported him have also been interested in what we've been doing. And to Audrey's point, I think what they're looking at is some of the colleges that are playing strongly into the skills space, and particularly around commerciality, as to what that could look like if you had that working well at a regional level, which I believe we do, but how that could be scaled amongst other colleges. And that is certainly something that's current within the thinking, I think, of senior officials and the Minister himself.
Thank you. And I think any examples that you've found as you've gone around other parts of the country, any positive examples that you think are good ones of that, I'm sure the committee would appreciate further information on it. And just one final question on this then. The Minister will make, I suspect, a statement around this stuff tomorrow about the funding landscape. Given what we've just heard, the conversation we've just had around funding, what's your views on the Minister's proposals to move the funding for skills from SDS to the SFC?
I'm happy to start there. So the position of the college sector would be that that's a helpful move in bringing those together, because I think to this committee, but certainly in consultations, have responded that the receiving funding through 2 different routes by 2 different mechanisms, often many different mechanisms, the bureaucracy that surrounds that, the need to service that, all takes away resource from the frontline college delivery. And so the streamlining of that, I think, is a helpful step. Obviously, we need to see how that works through. You've got the apprenticeship side, coming in, and we touched on apprenticeships a few minutes ago. You've got the apprenticeship side coming into SFC, and so that's new approach that they will need to look at, and we just need to ensure that the the streamlining of the funding around apprenticeships that we've touched on and that can bring benefit happens whilst all of this transition happens.
Thank you.
I welcome the simplification of the funding landscape, and I say that actually as a principal, but also on behalf of the sector as well. The apprenticeship commissioning model as it currently exists doesn't work for all of us, and therefore having it more closely aligned with our core funding is going to be hugely beneficial. Obviously, as a college sector, we're keen to work in that transition to that new model, and certainly there's a whole host of expertise within the sector that is ready to make that offer of help. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm happy to extend the session, but can I ask members and witnesses just to maybe shorten their questions and answers a wee bit? And I'm happy for supplementaries, but maybe just we'll leave them till the end now and see what kind of time we have, whether we can take them or not. If I can move over to Bill.
Thank you very much, Convener. Careers advice is obviously a big issue, and the recent career review had recommendations to seek to ensure that career services are fit for purpose, which obviously we'd all would hope, and they also want to future-proof them to meet demands of a changing world of work, which is quite a dramatic statement to actually ask for. So, what progress has been made on careers advice and guidance and in colleges since the career review recommendations were published, please?
Happy just to give a few comments on that. So I think the direction that we're heading in is, again, helpful, and I think it's improving for colleges. We've now got Skills Development Scotland staff embedded in 5 colleges themselves, which that's the first time that's happened. So that's helpful. I think it's back to that sort of comparability element as well, because if you look back at the the support in schools and the the developing young workforce support that was in schools, you weren't seeing that to the same extent in colleges, and so it wasn't a level playing field to start with. But I think some of the recent developments, as they are helpful and heading in the right direction, but it would be good to see that continue as we go forward.
Yeah, good. I don't know if anybody else has something that they want to add at all.
I think Andy's covered it.
Okay, yeah, it sounded quite straightforward, but thank you for doing that very much. So, something which might not be quite so straightforward then, regional strategic boards. Now, the committee is looking for some kind of update as much as we can across the board in terms, if you pardon the pun, in terms of reform or dissolving of the Glasgow Colleges Regional Board and the dissolving of the Lanarkshire Strategic Regional Board also. And in fact, on top of that, further integration across the University of the Highlands and Islands. I don't know if that affects any of you as well. But that's sounds quite dramatic. And basically, can I just ask what these proposed changes to the current regional board structure, how would that going to impact on colleges themselves, please?
I mean, I can say a few words on that, but I'm not sure how helpful they're going to be, in the sense that Colleges Scotland, where the membership organisation representing our members, we do that both to the individual colleges and the regional strategic bodies at this point in time. So it's probably not appropriate for me to be commenting on that, apart from to say that we work strongly with our colleges and regional strategic boards as our members, and whatever that structure is going forward, we'll continue to work with them and represent them on behalf of the overall sector.
Okay, thank you, Andy. I was wondering if, as principals of colleges, anyone has anything that they're maybe concerned about or maybe are happy with. I don't know, actually. Are you allowed to say?
Well, I have the luxury of being the only college in the Edinburgh region, and therefore my board is my board, and I don't have another regional board sitting over me, which in my view is a good thing. I think if you think back to why those regional boards were established, they were established at a time to ensure cohesiveness across a wider region with multiple colleges. And actually, I think what the decisions to remove those reflects is that was back in 2012, and that those partnerships and regional approaches and cohesive delivery has been established, and therefore there is no more need for that level of governance. Would be my take on it.
Sure, thanks. Joanna, do you look as though, and then Neil, please, thanks.
Yeah, I think, you know, colleges work best when they create partnerships organically. And, you know, as Audrey has mentioned, that's certainly the case in the areas of Scotland where there are multi-college regions. And the other point I would make is that actually, you know, what we need as a sector is the resource to support our students, and anything that takes that resource away from frontline teaching and delivery is, you know, would be something that we wouldn't necessarily be in favour of.
Yep. Okay, thank you very much. And Neil?
Just, I am not particularly cited on what's happening in terms of this particular question, Bill, so apologies. But like Audrey, I'm very grateful of the governance arrangements that I have. And I think the relationship between a principal and a chair is really important. I am, you know, been blessed in my tenure to work with some very good people, and with Susan Elston, I very much work in that vein. I think, though, that what you would want as a consequence of what's happening in Glasgow and Lanarkshire, and actually more broadly in terms of UHI, is that you'd want to make sure that the principal and the chair can still do what is fundamentally best for their staff, their students and their stakeholders. Yeah. And it's those principals and chairs who know that. And I suspect, you know, without necessarily knowing, you know, for sure, that degree of additional freedom that is going to be allowed as a consequence of this change is going to be beneficial to those principals and chairs, to make sure that they are doing the best they possibly can for those people that they work with and for.
Well, it all sounds pretty positive. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Bill, and I'll pass over to the patient, John.
Not always patient. Well, I mean, I have to say I'm delighted Glasgow's going to have 3 standalone colleges, and one of the principals is going to be Joanna Campbell, I believe. So I can maybe start with you on the theme of student poverty, which I assume affects most colleges, but certainly would affect Glasgow colleges. A study came back and said that over 60% of students are reporting that they are in financial difficulty. Is that realistic, and how severe is that? Have you any thoughts on that?
Yes, I actually think that statistic is probably lower than the reality, and certainly the situation that I'm faced with in my college is, you know, students stating that poverty is impacting on their ability to be able to learn. So, and my college isn't unique in providing this in any way, because I know that other colleges approach this in a similar way, but we put on free breakfast. We've done that since 2017. We put on lunch for our students as well. The Students' Association do a whole host of work supporting students, whether it be through food banks or whether it be working with local organisations to offer discounts. But the reality of the situation is that we're seeing more homelessness amongst our student body, and we're certainly seeing students who have been impacted by poverty more so now than we've seen in any of the years gone by. So it's a very real issue, and something that, you know, we as colleges have taken decisions to invest our resources in a way that will be able to support them, but that means divesting resources elsewhere. So, yes.
So there is a real problem, in other words.
A real problem.
Andy Whitty, I mean, you've got the oversight of the whole country. Is that your feeling it's consistent across the country, or is it particular in some areas?
Certainly, from what we understand, yes. I mean, there's poverty is as real in rural areas as urban areas. There may be different drivers to that, but they both need to be tackled. The report didn't surprise me when that came out, and you've got then the knock-on potential impact of sort of digital poverty and accessing some of the hybrid learning that may come from that. And while that was recognised, you know, the specific fund for digital poverty is now stopped. But I think there's something around some of the other changes in the sector, with SAS taking on further education, as higher education bursaries. I think there's opportunity there around where there's different rules on hardship funds at the moment between FE and HE, that there's an opportunity to maybe look at that, because we have had the situation where a college has been oversubscribed in one of those hardship funds and had to turn students away, but has had to return funding from the other one because the students didn't meet the criteria. And so I think being able to hopefully bring that together would be helpful as we go forward.
Mr Cowie, I mean, most of us think of the North East as the richest part of Scotland, but we realise there is some poverty there as well. And I mean, in the 2023 committee report, it talked about students dropping out. Is that happening?
I think that in terms of our retention, that's improved significantly, but I think that's down to the hard work of not only our lecturing staff, but our support staff, to ensure that we can make sure that we are, as quickly as we possibly can, addressing the needs of students. I think, to echo what's been said by colleagues already, though, is certainly I would think that the figure that was in that report was probably conservative. And I'm genuinely concerned. Again, in preparation for this event today, I was talking to colleagues, and we have roughly a £9.5 million bursary budget. We will spend all of that money, and that's us having gone back to SFC and asked for an additional 1.4, which they granted. And I think also when you think about, looking around the room, have we not all in some shape or form been impacted by the cost of living position? And actually then, if you think about the most generous bursary that we would award would be to a care experienced learner, £8,500. The impact is going to be there. It's going to be a harder thing to make ends meet. And we are getting awareness locally in the North East that, food anxiety, concerns around how to budget for food and just how to budget for all other things is proving challenging. And I think one of the other things that was touched on by Joanna was this notion of homelessness. Now, we haven't got any hard and fast evidence around this, but there's a colleague from RGU who's doing a piece of work on hidden homelessness, and it's about sofa surfing. And again, we're very interested in finding out a little bit more about how that impacts on us in terms of our own students. And also, again, colleagues have mentioned student kitchens, student pantry. Food flies out the door quicker than we can stock it. So we're now having to put additional support, and that's thankfully done through the Student Association, who are doing a great job on that. But they're having to put facilitators in there to assist the distribution of that kind of food fairly and evenly. And of course, we, like Joanna's college, we've been offering free breakfast for some considerable time. That's a very different position to what we were probably like, 5 or 10 years ago.
And I mean, in the 2023 report as well, there was talk about a special support payment from the government, and perhaps that students should be getting the equivalent of the living wage. Has that actually happened, Ms Cumberford?
Not as far as I'm aware.
No. No movement on that at all that we're aware of. Okay. I mean, digital poverty just got mentioned, I think, by Mr Whitty. Is that an issue? I think the point again was made that it's not just about not having a laptop, but there's also, what kind of Wi-Fi signal have you got at home? Have you got space at home to actually sit down and do the studying? Any thoughts on that? Ms Cumberford.
Going through the pandemic put a spotlight on digital poverty. So it was always there. And going through the pandemic really shone a light on some really challenging situations that our students are in. So digital poverty in my own college is as much of an issue as the cost of living is just being fed, actually eating. It's the basics, it's the eating, it's the heating, it's the being able to afford to travel to get to college in the first place.
I mean, I was going to say, presumably being in a city, it's a bit easier for your students to actually physically get to the college. Is that the case, or is that not always the case?
I'm not sure that is always the case, actually. I mean, I've shared some frustrations in the Edinburgh region that there is free bus travel to students, but you have to be 22 years old or less. And the average age of a college student, and there are 30,000 of them in Edinburgh going through Edinburgh College, is closer to 32 as opposed to 22. So I think there are some kind of policy interventions that could be thought about more carefully when it comes to the makeup of the student body in a college.
And I mean, presumably, especially some of the older students, if they've got children or caring responsibilities, it would suit them to be at home, but then again, only for some courses, perhaps?
Well, in our we have a very large ESOL provision, which is teaching English And many of those students are women, and many of those women are lone parents. And what we found through the pandemic was that the online and learning through distance learning and learning online was actually something that they really wanted, because it suited their lifestyle. Cut down on travel meant they could look after their kids. And we've continued with that actually through that provision. So there is quite a lot of provision that we still do online because it's what the students want.
Okay. I mean, we could probably explore this longer, but unless anyone else has got anything they particularly want to add, Mr. Carey.
Just very, very briefly, it's an interesting conundrum for us in terms of NESCL's approach to digital poverty. And it's been alluded to already that, you know, the Digital Poverty Fund, for us, it was about £380,000. That was very valuable monies to allow us to make sure that people weren't experiencing digital poverty. There is a certain irony, though, and you know, whilst I am a fan of the change of approach that SFC have taken, one of the things I've not been particularly fond of is that for a long time we had a system called Bring Your Own Device, or BYOD, and it was very successful. It had been running for about 11 years, and at its height it accessed laptops to about 1,200 of our students, particularly at FE level and at some at HNs. And when it came to the pandemic, it basically meant that pretty well every student that within the college could walk out and go online learning without any problem. It was seamless. And yet, we were always considered a bit of an outlier in terms of the study expenses budget or the allocation that's given in terms of student support funds. And consequently, SFC changed the guidance to prohibit that actually those funds being used for such a scheme. So we had to abandon it and actually think of other ways of doing things. Now, that wasn't particularly clever in my view, and I'm not sure how many other colleges were impacted, but it worked really well for us, and it worked really well for our students. And in the absence of digital poverty, and it's a bit of a confession, but in the absence of digital poverty monies being dried up, we are looking again at looking what's best for students and trying to make sure that we can use what's allocated to us through that student support budget as best as we can, and consequently, we're ploughing some of the monies back into this space.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you, John, and I'll go back to Pam.
Convener, can I ask, on the basis of a lot of what you've just said, mental health is obviously a concern. What impact has the end of the mental health funding for counsellors and the implementation of the Student Mental Health Action Plan had on support provision in colleges?
I'll unhappily start. It's pretty grim, actually, the impacts of the withdrawal of that funding. So, again, I'll summarise as best as I can. We've already lost one counsellor as a consequence of that, and the waiting times for the counsellor support that we actually got have now increased. But it's anticipated that what we will then do for the following year is probably reduce down from 4 counsellors, and bear in mind the geographic footprint that we have, Pam, it's quite big. So we're going to reduce probably down from 4 to 1. And that means that, in essence, one council is going to be spread across Aberdeen, Fraserburgh and our Alton's campus during that week, a matter of days. And there's no funding that we're budgeting for 26-27. We also have student wellbeing advisors. That's reduced already from 5 to 2. And it's like, we've lost 3 temporary ones too. And the consequence of that is not only will that impact the services to students, which are increasing, in terms of this space, in terms of mental well-being and health. But it also is going to impact on our staff, because in essence the academic tutors that we have will then get more of this to have to deal with. And with all due respect, the conversations that we're having with NHS Grampian and with our university partners, there's no solution yet on making sure that whatever happens, consequence to all of this, is actually going to be fundamentally benefit for all students in the North East. So I'm genuinely concerned about the impact on the well-being and mental health of our students going forward.
As well, we actually made the decision to retain the services of our counsellor. It's the work that they do is oversubscribed, but that meant that we had to make a difficult choice in where do we turn down resource elsewhere. So, for example, in our student services area, we've reduced staffing levels in other aspects of college business, but we had to make that really difficult decision because we knew that this is an issue that is increasing, and we felt that we had to support that because it's having such a negative impact on our students. I think the delay in the Student Mental Health Action Plan being published hasn't been helpful because there's been a gap between when that funding ended and when the action plan was actually published. And there's a real need for that action plan to be implemented at this point in time because we need to come up with a longer term solution. The other thing I would add is Student Sport Scotland has made funding available to the sector for students, I've forgotten the name of them now, student sports and wellbeing coordinators. That has gone a long way to alleviate some of the impact of mental health and wellbeing on the student body, so that it's been really successful, so successful that Student Sport Scotland have actually extended that support that's going to be available to the sector for another 3 years. So,
okay, that's good.
I know, and just add, across the country, there's a repeat of the stories and examples you're hearing here around those really difficult individual college decisions around what to do about mental health support. Now the funding's ended. You've had some examples there. Also aware of one college that decided to put funds into mental health and to retain counsellors, but what they then had to not fund was business development. And then that has a knock-on impact with links to industry and also more recent asks from Scottish Government around how can you get more commercial income into colleges. And so you can only spend every pound once. And so these are the sort of really difficult decisions that have been made because of the situation we're in around mental health funding.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. If I can now turn to George.
Thank you, Convener. My question will be on widening access in general, mainly because my own constituency, and Audrey will be aware of the demography of having worked there in the past. But mainly, the colleges don't actually get the credit for being an access to higher education. We talk about widening access, but at the same time, we don't actually talk about colleges as much when we talk about that. So how are colleges dealing with the challenges that we hear often from HE establishments, where they say first year, second year is difficult, there's challenges there with the individuals that they're dealing with. And just another sidebar of this question as well, we use the SIMD figures to identify that. I know, Neil, in your area you've got some rurality in your bit. I'm assuming you will, as Joanna, as well. And I know it doesn't reflect where the poverty is in rural areas, but also it's the same in some urban areas, because it's street by street. It can almost be the difference. So how are you dealing with that? Are there any other measurements for data you can do to be able to identify these young people or mature students? And is there also, how are you dealing with the day-to-day dealing with people coming into HE under the current environment?
Answer that first. I think I'll probably start with the statistic. In the most recent set of figures that were published, 22% of undergraduates in university came from college, and actually only 50% of those go into undergraduate provision with advanced standing. So what that means is that they are having to repeat part of their college education when they go into university. I think what I would like to mention in my response to your question is the good work that we have been progressing in the south of Scotland. We were fortunate, as were NESCOL, in being one of the pilots for the Pathfinder project that SFC ran. And through that funding and initiative, we've been able to increase higher education provision in the in Dumfries and Galloway region with University of the West of Scotland. So we now offer degrees in business, cyber security, and we're now introducing next year creative industries provision and also health and social care. Now, the reason for that was because there wasn't access to higher education, and it was recognised that that was something that the region needed going forward. So actually, your point about SIMD, if we were to have considered that when we were looking at that project, we probably wouldn't have done that, because the data as it stands in a rural context doesn't stack up. So there is consideration required of other data to support that argument. We are members of the Joint Articulation Group. One of our colleagues has been the college representative on that, and if she was here today, she would be pressing those points on. We've still got work to do in meeting the COWA targets. We could go further on that. I don't think I'm going to say anything else around that. I'll probably pass on to my colleagues.
Yep, sure. I could maybe add something. I think the articulation arrangements that we've had in the North East are pretty well established, and between the college and particularly IGU, they've been pretty effective over the years. To kind of summarise, I think we've got about 72 degree link pathways with advanced standing, which is the 2+2, and 14 degree link pathways with advanced standing, that's year 1 to 3. And it's interesting that I think for 22-23 we had about 617 ESCOL students articulate to university. But interestingly enough, it was 870 the year before. So we're seeing a decline now in those students articulating. And we're trying to understand that a little bit better. We don't believe it's at all related to entry requirements at university, but actually maybe I think it's that more people are seeking to go to university directly. And I think that where that is a concern for me is that we tend to get a lot of younger people, particularly but not exclusively, who are maybe less confident about making that leap into HE, and coming through the FE vehicle of college is really, really helpful because they are nurtured, and actually, anecdotally and in more qualitative terms, we know that once they reach that kind of year 3 in university for a degree programme, they fare really well because they've been very well prepared. So I think it's just kind of a watching brief. We need to kind of keep an eye on what is happening there. And I think that probably is, there's always ways we need to keep an eye on, particularly the SIMD areas, and making sure that we are creating something that is about wide doors and deep reach and is truly accessible to all the forms of education and training that we provide.
Okay. Yep.
Just to add, I think widening access is something colleges almost do intrinsically. I think it's done, it's there. I think it's not always recognised. The Commissioner for Fair Access in his latest report and various recommendations made, one of them was to extend his remit to colleges by making it responsible for access for tertiary education, but that was the one recommendation that wasn't accepted by Scottish Government. It could have been useful if it had been accepted, but it would have needed, you wouldn't have necessarily just taken the university approach and applied it at college. We'd have had to look at the nuances around it, but it would have been helpful having that, the Commissioner having that official role to look at widening access over tertiary.
Okay, thanks for that. Basically, you mentioned UWS. I've got UWS campus in Paisley, where I am, and I visited them last week. And it's following on from Keith's question with regarding to the Funding Council in itself, because they were hitting a specific cause. They actually had a, maybe unusual to them, maybe not unusual to certain universities, but because there was a drop in college students, they had a drop in the number of students that they had, so therefore that had a knock-on effect to how funding came through the SFC. So therefore, their kind of question, their kind of ask, and I think it seems, do you agree with that idea that there needs to be a bit of Audrey's agility and flexibility with the SFC in order to kind of take that into account when organisations like yourself and universities are going through that? And specifically because UWS, to use an exact example, is most of the nurses in Scotland come from UWS. So you basically had a situation where young people or older people who were coming through the process, the 2-year course to get at, I think it's 2 years because my daughter did it, at college, was effectively, there was less students coming through. So therefore it had a knock-on effect. So how do we deal with that, and do you agree there needs to be a wee bit of flexibility in the funding mechanism in order to take that forward so we can look at it in a more strategic way?
I can pick that up. So I think for me the question is the potential for unintended consequences when you see what's happening on the ground. So if you take my own college as an example, so a fifth of our students, so about 20%, go to university. And out of that 20%, 60% go in with advanced standing, so they'll go into either year 2 or year 3 of the degree, which is a great thing. But then if you go back to what I said earlier, which is we are noticing that the demand for what colleges should be doing is changing, and it's changing very quickly. And we are seeing very clear evidence that the demand for long, fat qualifications that take a year, 2 years, 3 years for students to do are becoming less and less attractive. People want to get into work, or they want to get a better job, and they want to do it as fast as they possibly can, more or less. So the unintended consequences is that I've had conversations with my four local universities who are all seeing a reduction in the number of students progressing from the college into the university. And my worry is that that then has the unintended consequence that those universities may then decide to try and pull students into university, into year one, that would ordinarily have gone to college because they needed that college environment, which is maybe a better kind of, or a more intense wraparound support. And actually all we are doing is displacing the same people that are on the ground, and they're not necessarily going into the right place. You can understand it from their perspective that they'd be looking at trying, obviously because of the way the funding is, they're trying to just deal with that shortfall then. So, you know, you can understand why they would do it, you know, if that was the case. Which is an unintended consequence, which is it's driving behaviour that is not necessarily actually what is the right thing to do. I agree with you, but I'm just saying that is there not need for more flexibility from the SFC? Yes. It's the short answer.
Later on as well, so. If I can go to Keith now, please.
Thanks very much. It's a bit related to that last point, because what you were saying, Audrey, about the nature of the courses which people are interested in has got an impact here. But has the sector made any assessment of the effectiveness of SFC's new outcomes framework and assurance model since its introduction? I'm quite reading the report, and I wasn't on the committee when it was put together. It does seem that the data is very important, and if people don't have a grip on it, and the SFC seem to be reluctant to provide particular matrices for people going through, then that's an issue. But has the sector as a whole looked at the model, and if so, what does it make of it?
I can start off with that. I mean, it's a recent change. It's from this year starting, so it's very new. I think one of the stated intentions of it was to simplify the interactions and make it more streamlined. Some of the thematic approaches that they are introducing alongside OAA, who are now involved in that, I think the jury's still out to how simplified it will be for the college, and actually it may still be the same amount of work or potentially some more. So I think we need to watch that space to how that develops. But I think there's still clarity needed over some of the individual roles of organisations within the system going forward as well. So it's very early days at the moment of that new outcomes framework.
I think we're working through the first year of it, and QAA, who are responsible for working with us on the enhancement of our provision and the assurance of that, obviously that interweaves into that model. So, you know, there's a number of working groups across the sector who are working very closely with the Funding Council as that rolls out. So I guess in 12 months, if we were sitting here, we'd be able to answer that in a more fulsome way.
Presumably, the idea of this moving at pace, it just seems to me that from your own self-interest, people like the Funding Council, the Government, this committee and others having a very clear idea of what's actually happening, what benefit is being produced, is extremely important. In my own area, we've got a college which is steadily withdrawing from one of the council areas, the one which Andy mentioned earlier on. One of the highest areas of deprivation. So the benefit in that area is reducing over time. And surely it would aid parity of esteem, which I remember from 15 years ago when I had responsibility for colleges, was the big rallying cry for the college sector, I think to some effect as well. Parity of esteem is served by the fact if you can demonstrate exactly what the benefit is, and it has to be absolutely clear and accurate figures. And I get a sense that the SFC, for example, they say it's not their business to talk about the outcomes for individuals. I don't know why that's the case, but surely clear information is something that should happen at pace, and it's in your interest to make sure that happens.
It's just an observation, Keith. I think that if we look back over the years of the quality arrangements for the college sector beforehand, I would be asking the question about the impact that Education Scotland has had. And actually, are we in a better position? And across the piece, the educational piece, are we in a better position as a consequence of that? Maybe we haven't fully understood exactly what that impact has been. For me, I think it's imperative that if you're adopting a new quality model, that we are going to be clear about what the impact of college delivery is going to be on those people that we seek to serve. And I would agree with what's been said thus far, is that it's too early for us to tell if this is really going to work, if it's going to fly. But we need to be smarter than perhaps we have been beforehand in making sure that we can demonstrate our impact, because fundamentally, we all know that we make a difference in our respective colleges, and beyond this, colleges are, in terms of trying to get that piece around parity of esteem right, so that young people, not so young people, and their influences within and beyond school understand exactly what benefits could be coming to them, in terms of the progression towards employment. We need to be able to get into a more systematic way of actually making sure that we, in a very accountable way too, we are clear about the impacts that we are having on those people that we serve.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Willie, can I turn to you for your questions?
Yeah, so you said there's a £775 million backlog in the building maintenance. What does that look like? Give me a bit of colour about the kind of buildings that you're working in and what impact that has on students and staff.
Some general comments, and then individuals may want to. So the college estate's been picked up previously by this committee. Hugely varies. So there is some new campuses and investment, but far too many old campuses that are leaking. They're not even wind and watertight. You've literally got your red buckets catching water, and that's the teaching environment. And so there's something about the experience of the learner in that, and also is that preparing them for the modern workforce and places of work. So there's some real challenges. And so back in 2017, there was a college estate survey done which said £360 million was needed to make the current buildings wind and watertight at that point. And we all know the inflation on construction costs since then. But of that 360 million that was required, the last time Audit Scotland reported on it a couple of years ago, they said there'd been a shortfall of 321 million. So basically just the health and safety and really high urgent issues had been tackled. But that means that the backlog maintenance builds up and the situation gets worse. Funding Council are currently doing an infrastructure investment plan. They've just been doing a baseline survey of the data. I think that's probably a good data set that they've actually collected. I think there's something about pace again, about where we are with this, and they're due to publish something, they said, in February around that. But the validation of some of that data is being extended, and so we've got those challenges. But when we did a survey as College of Scotland of our members back in May 23, they reported 775 million of costs at that point in time. So that's the best figure we've got at the moment till we see the SFC work. But that is just for effectively wind and watertight or replacing where something's about to fall down. It doesn't at all start addressing net zero, and colleges need to meet net zero by 2045. And it doesn't deal with RAC at all. We still do not have a route to a solution for RAC, and there's 7 colleges, over 11 buildings that are suffering from RAC.
So we're quite a bit over time. Could I just have some quick examples of buildings that are not up to scratch?
Yeah, I mean, there is at least one college that I know of that's had to close their campus because it's deemed to not be safe for students and staff to operate, such as to work and learn in that campus, such as the state of disrepair. mean, we've heard from Andy, there's issues around windows not being watertight. My roof leaks, and my building's quite new. My Dumfries campus was built in 2008, and I've got leaks in the roof. So, you know, that's the reality of we cannot maintain some of our college estate. So, for examples.
So this is a question for Audrey, because Audrey's been quite outspoken about maybe, about the need, I know, to have that kind of regional approach, and to give greater freedoms. Paul Little's talked about a kind of more polytechnic model I've heard him talking about in a regional basis as well, tying it in with the local economy and other institutions. What's different about what you're proposing from what's there already, and what could that bring?
So, if you take the city deal and how it operates in Edinburgh and Lothians, that in effect helped to create both a structure and a culture of collaboration between colleges and universities and other partners, whether it was industry, local authorities. So it was a real driving force to bring people together in a way that hadn't been happening before, to look at particularly the regional needs and how those needed to be met now, but also with that eye on the future in terms of what do we need to start to line up between us. And for me, there is a huge potential, and it's not simply with the state actually, but in terms of actually what is provided and how it's provided to both individuals and to industry by a collective, a consortium of partners, is the value of that, I think, is tremendous. Now, at the moment, those partnerships and collaborations are happening because of the leadership within the institutions, because we know what needs to be done, so we're doing it despite the constraints that we're under. And for me, it is about that untapped potential. It's how much more we could do if a much stronger focus on place, on region, was given, where there's a bit of trust given to those regional partners, with accountability and with clear outcomes about what's expected to be delivered in that region, is over to you guys. And
so you've got various different governance bodies,
yes, that
cover all of those institutions. Is part of this your plea to have greater flexibility, but also an ONS reclassification? I mean, how far are you going with this? What would be essential to change in terms of the flexibilities to make this possible?
Well, I do remember actually when ONS, it was announced that I happened to be sitting beside Anton Muscatelli at Glasgow University, and I did ask him if he fancied a merger, just in the fact that I fancied that the university world of no ONS was much more appealing. I mean, I know that is being looked at in various ways at the moment by government, working with the sector to see if there's any, what I would describe as loosening up of the current system to allow us to take decisions and the best decisions that we need to take for our regions. But again, I'm not sure that's happening quickly enough. The pace of change is really, really fast, and the changes required in the system just don't seem to be happening fast enough to keep up with those.
That's fine. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you, Willie, and if I can pass to George.
Situation, but I'll leave that, Convener, and ask about a nice simple one: industrial relations. Since my time within the Education Committee, there has been a tension in industrial relations in the college sector that possibly isn't in other parts of the education side of things as well, particularly with lecturers and EIS FILA and management themselves as well. So I know we've got a multi-year deal for lecturers, 4 years, 3 years for other staff. I know we've got that now, but you know, how do we improve industrial relations? Because I know there, on both sides, there was a lack of trust there right from the start. And how do you get to that place? Because people are people, and if you get them in a room, you can 9 times out of 10 they disagree, but come out with some form of plan to go forward. So how have we not been in that position over the years?
I'm happy to take that one initially. So you're correct, George, the multi-year pay deals have been very helpful, and it means that hopefully our students will not be impacted this year at the time that they need to complete their qualifications. I think the other thing I would say is that we've very much seen a resetting of the relationship with Unison since they changed their governance around their FE branch, so we're working very collaboratively and collegially with them. But I just wanted to mention the group that the Minister convened, the Lessons Learned group, which has met now for on three occasions. And employers and staff representatives around that table, there's been productive discussions and a willingness to work together. And one of the things that we're looking to do is by working together, improve the national bargaining machinery. And in order to do that, we need to look at a longer term solution as to how that operates. We have agreed through that group to look at the NRPA, the National Recognition Practices Agreement, but this has been stalled by the trade unions, so the employers are keen to move that on. Much of the Strathesque report, which was the review that was done into the national bargaining machinery, the recommendations from that are discussed through that group. And the other thing that the employers have looked for through the work of that group is an independent chair to the NGNC. Again, the staff side have rejected that at this point in time, but we do continue to try and progress that through that group. And I think just to summarise what I've said there, the Lessons Learned group has been welcome, and certainly the tone of the conversations that we've had certainly are very collegial and supportive, but there's still work to do, and from the employer's perspective, we're really keen to look at that NRPA moving forward.
I'm happy.
Okay, thank you, George. Rossi, you've got one final question?
Learned is being followed up on, and Joanna has just covered that. So given how far over time we are, I'm content with that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to thank you all for your time today and the evidence that you've given. And this concludes the public part of our proceedings. I'll now suspend the meeting to allow our witnesses to leave, and the committee will then move into private session to consider its final agenda.